What's up, everyone? Welcome to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. This is a banger of a lesson. This is where the magic happens, where we truly gain momentum and reveal the hidden potential behind our image. There will be lots of post-production today, lots of tricks. Some of them you know, some of them you don't. New ones borrowed from matte painting, which is also kind of interesting. But yeah, everything on a bigger scale. But at the same time, we hope you enjoy the simplicity and the flexibility of this approach. So let's begin. This lesson, just like the previous and the next one, are time lapses from the process. Today we do a typical matte painting work, perhaps matte painting on steroids, because we can generate with Firefly and we can enhance it. But yeah, it's pretty simple technically, but still it's pretty nice to see how it looks from start to finish. I'll chime in here and there with additional comment. We started with the ninja, whose arms we snapped in 3D last time. We can agree he was kind of neglected in 3D and he needs much more love now. So we are slowly starting to change him. Basically, we are doing what we did earlier in the Mediterranean project, which is going piece by piece. That's the easiest way for us to control it. Giving prompts similar to what we used during the research, like some Tibetan monk or something like that. We are also giving prompts about the colors of the clothing or the material of the clothing, just to change it into something more fitting the space. We see that this process is very organic. And it's all about getting your leg in the door. We just fight to get that initial foothold, this good generation. Out of 5 attempts, 1 is good and that's all we need. Obviously, along the way, we came across some ridiculous generations, but that's fine. We will try one more time again, and perhaps another one, and maybe another one. And okay, if that doesn't work, we need to switch gears, as we usually do. We can do 2 different things. And since our prompts are as simple as it can be, we can either make a new selection, make it smaller, or perhaps leave some parts in, or actually we can use guided generation. You can notice by the magenta color that we are using the selection brush right now. We want the Firefly to consider the background and try to push him to generate something more sensible this time. Ultimately, we can Frankenstein this thing together. We did the same with the Pride Parade example, we did the same with the Mediterranean example. We showed the principles way back, actually in the 5th lesson of guided selection, so be sure to look it up if you haven't already. And this time, we don't have to spend a half an hour on it. In fact, it's just 10 minutes, we already have the main character of the story. And by the way, if you're curious about the ins and outs of this post-production, feel free to investigate the PSD files that are attached to this masterclass. Moving on, we just know that some of those animals and people in the foreground are just not enough. And at this point, Magnifique wouldn't work. So we do a quick Firefly pass here. We focus mainly on the foreground objects. We are not super successful at the very beginning, but that's okay. We've been there, that's not a big problem. And one thing to remember here, even though it looks kinda janky at moments, but those generation tools will get better, way better in the next year or 2. And what will remain the same is how we operate between 3D and AI. You can go through 3D stage as quickly as possible and still fix it in post and have those incredibly unique worlds as we have right now. Okay, anyway, finally we get into a good enough place and we can move on. The next up, and this is an important thing, generally, it's a good idea to do a quick test run with Magnifique or any creative upscaler of your choice, just to see how it handles the scene. Does it hallucinate? Does it work? And believe me, there's a big potential for hallucinations in a scene like this. Most of our assets are pretty blurry, so yeah. So we run to Magnifique, standard settings of creativity at 3 and HDR at -1, and that pass gives us an overview of what's okay and what's not. We also try to get it more creative freedom to Magnifique, creativity at 5 and lower the resemblance. And afterwards we can see how the image behaves. We focus mostly on the faces and the animals. We just look if they don't turn into an undistinguishable mess. But yeah, we make like a mental note of those areas which are problematic and target them with Firefly later. And here we return to the second main character, the Yak, who was previously just some model from like 10, 20 years ago, like from GTA 3.
We see that some of those generations are a bit more comical, some less so, and the whole process of generating something meaningful does require some curation, understanding what's good and what's bad. And once again, history repeats itself for the third time. After some generations, we get the face, we remove the horns and place it on top, and at some point, it just clicks. Next up, we improve the fabrics. Here, if someone is a purist, they can work on the fabrics, work on the texture, no problem. But since that part stays in the shadows, all you need is actually some additional detail, almost like at a subconscious level. We just want to match the detail frequency to the rest of the scene. But on the other hand, we cannot leave them plain simple, especially in the foreground. Large patches of plain white diffuse don't work in our favor, so it's nice to add some kind of visual distraction. Magnifique will blend it all into a nicer mass later on. Moving on, we just had a round of generating interiors. In this case, we are using selection brush technique. Also, there was some lazy brushwork when we tried to help Firefly add some lights inside, whether it was supposed to be candles or something else. This experiment wasn't that perfect, but ultimately we get something that simply imitates some detail in the interiors. Moving on, we add a touch of color to the gates and pseudo portals. That's something that came up while doing our research, the initial research. We want to bring this motif back here, and we didn't feel like doing it in 3D. Doing it now, it's so much faster. So yeah, just a touch of simple orangey red brush. We also add some hue to the open work elements, so they pop out a little bit more. It's not extensive, just some bits of color here and there, some extra details that will help differentiate the surfaces and to add more depth to the assets. We can see that it's definitely getting more of that refined look now. And at the same time, we are organically adding more oranges to the image. Our color palette references a lot of warmth, and that's the way to implement it the best way, just plainly by introducing them by the brushwork. It also kind of helps that some of the columns are purely white, so we get a nice neutral reference to that warmth that we are adding here. Next up, we are adding even more color, but with a different technique this time. Now we are brushing some of those custom textures on top of our image. We can sneak some color to give those gray uniform assets a bit more depth. We are further enriching the color palette in a very organic way. Sometimes we have a pop of red, blue, and so on. We hope that Magnifique will do some magic there, but regardless, it definitely adds some variety to the scene. All this brushwork is finally done, and we are happy with the results. With those paint overs, I think it's important to know if we are doing something in 3D or in post-production. Sometimes we get obsessed with having our 3D output so perfect that we can immediately send it to our clients. But very often, that comes without time cost. You can do many things in post-production and save yourself a lot of time. Anyway, we caught up to our initial plans. And at this stage, there's something very, very interesting. We take people and just blatantly change their colors. This is definitely something fun to do in post-production, to have additional control over those pops of blue, where they will appear. We are doing exactly what we have analyzed doing our color research, which is having color palette roughly with 80% warm and about 10 to 15% cool tones. And we can sneak those cool tones into the clothing. We can also sneak them into the background, because I assume that the background will have a pop of cool colors as well. Of course, the character is also blue, so that 10-20% of blue color palette works really nicely and organic here. And now, something extremely interesting and very experimental at the same time. We are back to those mountains. First, we generated the background in Firefly, and immediately we get something cool in return. And at this point, we thought that this might be it, that we could go with these mountains. But there's more we can do actually. I will pause the video and remind you about something really, really cool. So, just about 2 lessons ago, we showed you the experimental type of research to combine our assets with image references. We used Midjourney images and used style transfer in Magnifique to transform them into something else. Those were the results, and those are the images we used. So now, circling back to our image, we did literally the same with our image. We saved it and combined it with multiple different references from the research stage. And as you can see, similar kind of hallucinations started to appear. That was what we were hoping for, and we get lots of different layers to work with. In some of those transfers, we hallucinated the fabrics again. We got some additional windows, we got some custom brick facades, we have lots of highly custom passes that we can further transplant on top of our rendering. And what was really cool about one of those transfers was the background transformation. The mountains get additional details, lots of them actually. The fog, the colors, it's incredibly custom, and the best part, it's literally fitting our image perfectly. And sure, the architecture changes a lot, but we can easily clean it up with Firefly. So heading back to Photoshop, we have lots of different layers here, from which we can really extract whatever we want. We started with replacing the background. The rest of the scene has changed quite drastically, but we can remove all the towers with Firefly and try to get the quote-unquote clean backplate in just a matter of minutes. So as you can see, we fill in the gaps and pretty quickly the background fits our image. I think it's pretty damn cool. You can have insanely customized backgrounds with a little bit of out-of-the-box thinking. We also check if anything else came out of those style transfers. And there sure was, you know? We focus on this rocky mass, we change those columns, and yeah, with some of those different style transfers, we can really enrich our scenes by a lot. We get that stony appearance, and yeah, it adds a lot of that extra punch. This is what we are masking in, brushing in some areas here and there. At this stage, the image starts to feel complete. We run a few tests with Magnifique, some of them with lower render resolutions. Same trick as we did before. When you lower down the resolution and make 4 times or 8 times upscale, you are essentially giving more creative freedom to upscalers. And this is something we definitely need to take advantage of. Another part of post-production was boning all of the elements, adding fidelity and losing hallucinations in smaller bits. The hallucinations tend to pop up, especially in cases when there's a crowd of people. Magnifique can go crazy and it kind of melts them into one mess. So at this stage, we just had to power through all of those tiny corrections and just juggle Firefly and Magnifique to make it all work together. And I'll let the good old elevator music play.
Phew, that was something. Pretty fun post-production, but actually, we are not done. In the next lesson, we are actually finishing this image because there's a round of feedback. Hooray! Everyone likes to go back and change their images. So yeah, see you there and see how we handle it.